Okay. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And there we have it. And thank you, Rich, for doing that. I think we fixed the unmuting problem there. So we are, for those who may not have been here before or just only been here a couple times, we are a line by line big book study. So we're going through the book very slowly, very methodically, but really unlocking the power and I think the deeper meaning of what's going on in our text. And so, what we do, as most people know, is we break the text down into five categories. I will put those up on the screen for you. Questions, directions and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. And the colors you see there are just the highlighter colors I chose for myself. You can pick your own. But this helps really transform the big book, our big books, into really effective tools that we can use to share this message with other people. And of course, great reference for ourselves. And so the format is I'll be sharing today until about 7. And I'm not sure if I'll even go that long because the part we're going to read today is actually a little shorter. We are finishing out chapter 2, There is a Solution. And then after I'm sort of done my thing, we'll open up the meeting for comments, discussions, questions, your personal reflections, so forth. Just FYI, the meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube site. And only my part is recorded, though. When we get into comments, I don't want to put anybody up on the YouTube site who's not comfortable with that. And it's just audio, by the way. There's no video. So today, like I shared a moment ago, we are in There is a Solution. We are on page 28. And the third full paragraph where it starts, the distinguished American psychologist. Now, what I'm going to do is just sort of kind of summarize where we're at just so we can get our bearings. And so Bill recently, we had read the spiritual experience, and where Bill cited Carl Jung, and also we talked about, he cited Carl Jung in the example of another member with Roland H. And he cited that Jung's belief that alcoholics must undergo a vital spiritual experience in order to stay sober and really experience the feeling of being happy, joyous, and free that I think sobriety offers us. And so, with that notion of a vital spiritual experience, it might seem like Bill is sort of narrowing the gateway through which an alcoholic can pass to freedom. However, what we'll see today is that Bill actually makes that gateway wider than ever. And how he does that is he turns to an even greater authority than Carl Jung, and that would be the eminent American psychologist William James. Now, we don't talk a lot about William James these days in just average conversation, but let's just say back in the 30s, William James was probably more well known than Dr. Phil, and that's sort of a weird comparison, but William James was considered the father of American psychology and psychiatry. And not only that, he was a pioneer in mental health. He was also a pioneer in medicine. He was a medical doctor as well as a psychologist, as well as a philosopher. So he was like this tremendous Renaissance man. Um, but through turning to James, what Bill does is he makes a clear declaration that a vital spiritual experience is open to anyone, regardless of religious affiliations. Actually, what Bill does is he establishes something, using James, what he does is he establishes something that I think is a bedrock of AA life today, and that is this distinction between our religious life and our spiritual life. And for most of us today, that distinction's pretty clear. But back in the 1930s, it was a pretty radical notion to think that you could have a spiritual life apart from your religious practice. But Bill really establishes that. And he says that a vital spiritual experience is open to anyone, regardless of their religious affiliation. So, and then Bill makes it clear that by sharing our spiritual experiences, by when recovered, and he refers to them as recovered alcoholics, when a recovered alcoholic shares his experience with a suffering alcoholic, we create an opening, an opportunity where just perhaps that sufferer can say, yes, maybe I have this thing too. And we'll delve more into that in a moment. Also, just in terms of the colors and the categories, almost everything we will talk today is going to be explanation or description. So it's except for one or two sentences, which I'll point out, it's almost all green, which is the color I use. So starting off on 28, the distinguished American psychologist William James, in his book Varieties of Religious Experience, indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. Now, today that might seem like an obvious statement to us because that is the mindset that we bring to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what we've been taught here, and that's what we try to share with others. However, at the time, even within AA, that was sort of a radical statement. That idea that you don't need to find God in one particular way. And remember, we talked a couple weeks ago about one of the things Bill did in the book is he really tried to bridge a lot of the tensions that were growing in Alcoholics Anonymous, even 2 years in. And one of the big tensions was in spirituality, because in the New York AA circles, they lived very much and they got sober very much by a, you would say, God as I understand him mentality. Whereas Akron was quite the opposite. It was very structured and very rooted to certain religious beliefs. And Bill was trying to find a middle ground with that. And so if what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a living creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. And there's a lot in that one sentence right there. The first thing I want to point out is the beginning of that sentence where he says, if what we have learned, felt, and seen means anything. So he's talking about, he wants to establish this is not something I just read in a book. This is not something that I got through reading William James. This is something that I've personally experienced. It's based on experience. It's based on actual lived encounter, his own lived encounter with a power greater than himself. And then he's saying it's open to anybody, regardless of race or creed. And for those, excuse me, I'm grabbing my 1939 dictionary. I never knew what creed meant, and I think I put the definition in the chat. A creed is actually a brief statement of religious or philosophical belief. So when you think about it, in AA, we have a number of creeds that we live by. And so regardless, whatever our race, creed, or color are, we are children of a living creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Now that is what he's doing there is he's really distilling down into a very simple sentence the essence of what William James brought to him through the varieties of religious experience. And I don't know if anybody's ever tried to read it. Bill said that when he read it in Towns Hospital, he said he devoured it. And if you've ever tried to read it, Bill, anybody devouring that book it's like devouring a software manual. It is a very complex, very dense piece of philosophical writing. And but thank God Bill was able to distill down what it's trying to convey. And here we go. Those having religious affiliations will find there nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. Now, this was a time, even though religion was very tested during the Great Depression because so many people were suffering. In the culture of America in the 1930s, religious affiliation was something most Americans did have, unlike today, and it is something that most people felt strongly about. And again, it is, let's think about how radical this is. What Bill is doing here is he's really saying, regardless of your religious beliefs, regardless of how strongly you may feel about that, he's basically saying we have no dog in any of those fights because we are focused on something entirely different than that. We are focused on your own personal spiritual experience apart from structured religion. And again, if I didn't point it out, that's all explanation, or description, so that's all in green. The next paragraph, all in green as well. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. And I just think when I read that, he is the master diplomat. Because right in the first paragraph, he's really speaking to the New York crowd, who are the God as I understand him people. And in this next paragraph, he's talking to the Akron crowd, who tended to be very firm and fixed in this is the way you have to find God. And he's really bridging that. And apart from the historical significance of that, what I really want to point out is for us today, or for me today, let me put it that way. For me today, the significance of this is not just historical. What it's saying is that when I carry the message, I need to carry it. I am called, let me put it this way. Personally, I am called to carry the message in a way that mirrors this kind of openness and inclusivity. And that might seem like, okay, all right, that's what you do. But for a guy like me, I don't know about anybody else, but I was the type of alcoholic and still can be, who will sometimes get strong opinions. And I don't know, do I have any other opinion people on the call today? Anybody? There we go. Okay. So I'm not alone. And what I'm seeing is that it's about bridging, not boxing. I mean putting in boxes. I don't mean boxing with gloves. Okay. So this should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. Like, for instance, Dr. Bob was very involved with his church. Bill, although he was a passionate spiritual seeker his whole life, and even his sponsor in later years was a Catholic priest, Father Eddie Dowling. Despite that, he never really formally affiliated himself with any church. So, and I will say also, I'll just share my own experience that I was talking a little bit before the meeting. I've been sober now since 1988, 34 years, and through almost all of that, I never felt the pull to religious affiliation, and just about, and I always said, when I said, well, I'm one of those people who don't favor that, and that's okay. And then about 6 months ago, something sparked on a whole other level. But that's that. All I'm saying is that you never know when it might happen, if it ever does. Reading on, this first sentence is explanation. In the following chapter, so it's green. In the following chapter, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it. Then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. So he's really he's doing two things here. We'll see this. It seems like, because we're coming to an end of there's a solution. You can see on the chapter ends in the middle of the next page. So on the one hand, what he's doing is he's doing like a lot of good authors do, and he sort of telegraphs, okay, reader, here's what lies ahead. Here's what you can expect in the pages you're going to read ahead. So he's doing that. But he's also, we'll see, laying an important foundation that's directly relevant to the points he's just been making. So he's saying he's made these points about the religious experience, or excuse me, the spiritual experience is open to anybody. And of course, we know it's already been established that we need that vital spiritual experience in order to remain sober. So he's saying in the following chapters, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it, then a chapter addressed to the agnostic, the person who is unsure or hasn't really made a decision about spirituality or religion. Now, this next sentence I put as a reward or a promise, and I'll explain why in a moment. Many who once were in this class are now among our members. And then the next sentence I also have as a reward or promise. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. The reason I put those in blue is that what he's saying is that many who were once agnostic, who were on the fence, are now among our members, meaning that while you have to have a spiritual experience, if you're not sure, the process of involving yourself with us will lead you to that in an kind of natural, organic evolution. Let's put it that way. He doesn't use those words. I'm using those words based on my own experience and also what I've seen with other members. So it's not when I say an organic, a natural evolution, as opposed to a strict indoctrination. That makes sense? Okay. And surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. So what he's saying is, even if you're not sure, it's okay. And I think this is something he really details more clearly when we get to the 12 and 12 and step 2, where he talks about the process through which someone can come to believe. You know, it says, like, at first we use the group, then we might use our quote unquote closest AA friend. So, but that part's for another discussion at another time. Then through the rest of the page, we're on page 29 now. I have this all as explanation. So again, we're back to green. Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. These are followed by 43 personal experiences. So remember, who's the intended reader here? Like these days, most of the readers of the big book are established members or newer members. But when they wrote the book, the thought was it's that suffering alcoholic, the person who is still drinking, who is hopeless, and who may have no direct connection or interaction with any one of us or with a sober member. So what he's saying is, okay, we've been talking about all this spiritual stuff, but in the in the chapters that come, we're going to give you a clear-cut plan. So don't worry about that. Don't worry that this is all going to be mystical and theoretical. And then we're going to give you 43 personal experiences. Now, it sort of shifts gears a little bit. And again, he is laying out the landscape of what you can expect. But I'm going to ask everybody to put on a second hat and think about if this were right now, if Bill were giving a master class in how to effectively share our own experience, strength, and hope with another person, with a suffering individual, how would we do that? So what he's saying, and he's talking about the people in the stories in the back of the book. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. When I read that and I thought about that closely, which was only recently, it's shifted something very important for me. In that I've been asked, I've been sober a while, so I've been asked to share my experience, strength, and hope a number of times. And I usually talk about, how bad it was and how I found AA and now I'm sober and now I'm grateful. And, but what he's saying here is when sharing their stories, these people are sharing about their relationship with God. They're sharing about a spiritual journey. See, and for years, I shared a drunkalogue. And why that's important to me is I still share a drinking story, but I share it in the context of a spiritual journey. If that makes sense. I share it. Why did I drink? And the book tells me I drink because of a spiritual malady. And because I've done today, I have done fourth and fifth step work on my drinking. I understand the causes and conditions, the underlying nature of my drinking, which was defects in my relationship with God. So each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. Now, if you go through the I have not inventoried the stories in the first edition, but I do know if you go through the fourth edition today, you will find that that's not always the case. In fact, I know that there are several stories I'm thinking about, some of them quite well known and often referenced, who don't mention God at all. And however, I'm focusing on what Bill's original intent was. These stories, and then reading on, these give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives. So he's talking about, in the paragraphs where we started, he's talking about how this is open to everybody. We have no dog in anybody's religious fight. And now he's saying we have all these stories and you're going to see a variety of experiences here. So we're going to basically put our money where our mouth is. This is not just rhetoric. And in the last paragraph, again, all explanation. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. And I think to understand why that's an important statement, I think that's more a little history in the sense of 1930s, very different than today, the culture. We are in we live in, you could call it like sort of a kind of, let's just call it a therapeutic culture where a lot of people have gone to therapy, a lot of people have been involved in 12-step programs. It's not unusual to hear people talk about their inner life or their spiritual life in conversation. That was not the case in the 1930s. As a matter of fact, it was considered something you did not talk about. So they're really crossing a bridge here by talking about this stuff back then. We hope so that's why he says, we hope that this does not offend anybody. Especially if I cite a spiritual experience that rubs against some religious belief you might have. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women, desperately in need, will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. Now I want to just emphasize one more point, and then I'll open it up. What I take away from that, remember for a second, he's telegraphing to the reader what you can expect and what you'll find here. On another level, he's also, what I think, providing a masterclass for people at all stages in the sober journey. Why it's important to share your story, why it's important to disclose deeper details, and what your goal is. What your goal is in sharing your story. And what the goal is, as I say, and this is when I realized this, it really shifted how I told my story. Because I thought for years that when I told my story, the purpose was to really, quote unquote, qualify myself as an alcoholic. Now, I'm not saying I don't do that, but the overarching goal when I share is so that new person who might be listening to me can say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. And so I'm doing it as a way to hopefully to connect some dots or create an awakening in somebody who is still lost in the mire of active alcoholism. So with that, I want to open up the meeting.